And welcome back. Here's another little teacher tip for you. I was teaching, as I may have mentioned in another video, during March 2020 when we went into lockdown. And one of the things I did love is the fact that Canvas was very good for helping me stay organized and helping my students to stay on track with what they needed to do. And one of the things that I used during the lockdown was modules. And actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you into one of my old courses so you can see how the modules were set up and how students were supposed to move through them. Now, you're currently in my Spanish 2 class from the spring semester of 2020. And as I mentioned, we went into lockdown in March, and so I had to find a way to easily and effectively communicate with my students on what they needed to be working on. So I'm going to take you over to announcements. I think I mentioned in setting up one of the videos that announcements are really awesome and they're very good, especially now that I'm back teaching face-to-face at keeping my students that are having to stay home because they're sick, or maybe they may have tested positive and they're going to be quarantined for 2 weeks. Announcements has been amazing at keeping my students updated and making sure that they don't get behind while they're gone. And that's going to be the key in surviving this school year, is making sure that we are not only catering and tailoring ourselves to the students that are face to face, but also figuring out a way to offer the maximum support to students that are at home or in quarantine. So I want to take you to announcements so you can see what a general announcement would look like back in the quarantine times of spring 2020. So what I've done here is I've gone back all the way to when our quarantine started, which was March 16th. And I did use announcements beforehand, but I just didn't use them as much. And this has been awesome. So we started out on March 16th. Let me take you into that announcement. So here's what I did is I recorded a video that showed my students how to log in into a website that I was going to be starting to use. Now this was very early on when I was still kind of figuring out what I was going to do and how I was going to keep my students moving and keep them learning, because we didn't know how long we were going to be in lockdown. So this was a recap that I did down here that they had to do a practice on this website. You'll find in announcements and also in assignments, videos are invaluable for students because there are always those students that either don't read the instructions or they just don't stop for a second. And so I find that videos are helpful to my students that are more visual learners and they struggle to follow step-by-step instructions. At least they can see it on a screen, they can pause, kind of like we do with these videos. They can pause and then they can go on and learn what they're supposed to do. So this was one of the examples. Let's go back to announcements and look at another example. So by the time I posted this announcement, we were about a week into DLD. And at that point, I started being able to add little pictures and memes, which is what my students usually see when they walk into my classroom. And I'm starting to learn to tailor announcements to suit my students. And this was when I had created module number 1 and module number 2. And as I will continue to go in this video, you'll see that I start getting a little bit more and more specific as I start getting my feet under myself and knowing what I'm doing. So this was just an extra little practice. I hosted a live session and reminded them that they weren't mandatory, but that was the time that was set aside, and I wanted everyone to attend because I really wanted to make sure that my students understood how to move through the modules. Now, the plus side to this is I'm now teaching face-to-face, and I took my students through the modules. I've created videos telling them how to work through modules. So now we really don't have an excuse for not understanding how things go. So let me take you into another day, and then I'll show you what a module looks like. All right, so this was about a month and a half into quarantine, and I was still posting my memes, and then I started linking to the modules to let the students know where they should be. And what I would do is if they were in the middle of a module, as you'll see right here, I would list out the things that they needed to do in the particular module. Students did struggle with a couple of things in working through the modules. They were starting to get confused and forgetting to mark things or trying to rush through them. So the modules were set up to where they couldn't move past it until they had done everything in order. So with all that being said, if you need to know how to link these things, you can watch one of my other videos that I have out there. But let's go ahead and look at modules. So here we are in what I call our Digital Learning Day Module 1. So usually it took students about a week or a week and a half to finish a module. And I would always set it up with some sort of introduction for them to know what to do. And then they would have to complete all items, and you can set that up in your teacher page. I will actually do a different video on how to set up a module, but I want to show it to you from the student perspective so you can see how they should be navigating through these modules. So let's look at the introduction to Module 1. So what students had to do is they clicked it, and then here gave them an explanation of what was expected of them in the module. Once they finished reading this, they were supposed to mark done. Now this is where most of the issues came in, that students were forgetting to mark it as done. So what I started doing in my announcements was I would put a little information beside that part of the module and say mark as done, submit the assignment, whatever they needed to do. So we're pretending to be a student, so we're going to mark as done and we're going to hit next. This goes into the do you review, need to review. And students were able to watch this video that summed up the concept that we were in. And they again marked done and hit next. Then came a practice activity for conjugations that students had to take. And I'm going to go ahead and do this so you can see what it looks like, but then we'll fast forward a little bit. So if they hit take this quiz, then they have this right here, which is giving them the instructions, which is awesome, and they go next. And now they get into he used to give, and they're going to give me the conjugation and hit next. And then they get a different verb, and then it's asking for this. Now, for students that struggled with accent marks, I kept these instructions here so that they could simply copy and paste. So if you have something like a visual or something that your students will need to see on questions, if you're giving a reading test or whatever, I would suggest leaving in instructions because they will be able to see that. So I'm going to go ahead and click next, and I'm going to pretend like I've done all of this, and I'm going to submit the quiz. And it'll tell me I've got 14 unanswered questions. That's okay. And we'll keep on cruising. And then that's what I'll see. That's what the students will see. And they got extra practice on this. So let's go ahead and click next. Then they had another quiz that they had to do. There are some instructions. I already took the quiz, and that's all that they needed to do. And then we hit next. Then they had another one that they had to do. And when they were done with that, we hit next. So now we're in the next little bit, which is a review of some vocabulary. And we used Conjugamos, but there's another module I want to show you some amazing tools in SmartSuite. Maybe I'll do another video on SmartSuite. That one was pretty fun. So we'll go ahead and click next. So right now we're in module 2. And what I chose to do, because this was the second week of digital learning for our students, I wanted to get their feedback on how things went. So this is what the survey looked like when they clicked it. I asked them how much time they were spending, did they like having the modules, how were they feeling, what was their workload like, and what they needed, what I needed to know. And these answers range from anything as, I hate digital learning, or I love it because I can go at my own pace. And then their workload for my class wound up being about the same as other classes. Some students that weren't doing as well, they claimed that I was giving more work, but they were able to work through the module on their own time as long as we all wound up together in the same spot. So once they submitted that, they would simply go next. And here is SmartSuite. SmartSuite was awesome. And I will do an entire other video on how to set up a Smart Suite and how to incorporate it in Canvas, because it really was a great tool. And then I did another survey asking my students after this. They had to type, not survey, but they had to type what their favorite activity was. And a lot of them gave great feedback saying that they loved it. It was a definite difference. So I'm going to mark this as done and I'm going to submit it and I'm going to say matching was my favorite. Oops. All right. And then we'll submit it. And then that's it. And then we'll go next. And they had a little bit of listening and reading practice that they had to do. Edpuzzle is another awesome integration in Canvas, and I can show you a little later on how that works. I'll do another video of how to link external tools to make assignments. But anyways, this kind of explains how modules were used. They are an absolute lifesaver when you are trying to keep your students caught up or trying to have them review things. It is an amazing thing. So I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage that you use modules. Stay tuned for other fun videos and other fun tips.